I love using topiary in my garden designs. It works equally well in castles or cottage gardens. It's great in modern or traditional centres, or even formal or naturalistic. It works with everything. My mother was fanatical about topiary. This is her garden here, and sadly she passed away a few months ago, but she had this massive topiary nursery and lots of topiary in her garden. Today I've got the sad job of actually lifting and finding new homes for some of the specimens. There's over 200 specimens here of all different shapes and sizes on the 2 acres. There's some green olive here, some box, but mainly yew. Yew's been used for topiary for hundreds of years. And why is that? Because it's a fantastic plant for it. It's got this lovely tight dark green foliage, and so it looks very neat when you cut it. If it has big leaves, you're never going to get this lovely fine look to it. And it's just a very tough, very versatile plant, so you really can't do better than this. I've worked on some gardens and there've been 300-year-old specimens that are actually been neglected. So what we've done is we've just chopped them off at the ground, right at ground level, and it regenerates, and that is amazing. You know, from a plant that old, you can cut it down to the ground and it just bounces back. If I cut into the stem like this, I wouldn't want to, but if I did, it would grow back. So even if you cut back into the old wood, it grows back. Almost any other conifer you do that to, it will not grow back, so you get left with a hole. So that really tells you all why it's so good. There's some things that yew really doesn't like. It does not like sitting in really wet ground, and it doesn't like being compacted and walked around a lot, which takes the oxygen out of the soil. So if you are planting in rather a wet site, just plant it on a slight mound, and that way you'll get the drainage and it will be absolutely fine. Everyone always says to me, why are we going for yew? It's so slow. But it's not. That really is a misconception. Yew is a pretty fast grower. I reckon it grows at about the rate of a boy. So if you imagine a 4-year-old boy to when he's 12, and it pretty much follows that pattern. If you want to speed it up, add some irrigation. Although it hates wet, in dry summers, if you give it some irrigation, it will grow like the clappers. Feed in the first 3 years really makes little difference, in my opinion. It's just the water. So just make sure you give it enough water to get it established in the first few years. You can really cut it when you want. It hid cut when they've got miles of yew hedges. They just cut it all the year round. So always remember that growth will follow the knife. And what we mean by that is if I cut this side hard back and I didn't cut that side, this side would grow out massively more than that side. So that's really helpful to know. So when you've got a ball and you want to make it symmetrical and one side isn't, the side that's not growing as well as you hope, cut it hard. It's counterintuitive, but it will make it bush out, and then you can even both sides up. Here we have a fine example of winter bronzing. People always get very worried when they plant a yew hedge and it suddenly goes this colour. But to be honest, many yew trees just grow out of it. The usual causes are that basically, because you've transplanted, you've reduced the root ball, and yet the foliage is the same. And so basically they're losing more water through the leaves than they're taking up through the roots. So that's normally the number one reason. And in a few years the roots come back, they redress the balance, and it's all fine. It can be starvation, but usually that's pretty unlikely. And also it could just be Phytophthora. And Phytophthora is a fungal disease which yews get particularly when they're wet. And the way you ascertain this is you just peel a bit of the bark, just the surface of the bark away at the bottom of the trunk. And then if it's a sort of reddish orangey yellow colour under, then it's probably Phytophthora, and if it's ordinary green, then it's not. If it is Phytophthora, then you need to spray with Subdue, and Subdue is a chemical that you can only have if you've got your PA1 and your PA6 qualification for spraying. If not, just get in a guy who has got it and get him to do it for you. I designed this garden for my mum about 8 years ago, and we wanted to introduce a lot of topiary in different ways. First off, we put the buttresses along the wall, the big yew buttresses, I love using buttresses to punctuate a wall because it means that the planting in between is highlighted and somehow lifted. We've used balls, collection of balls. I think they're nice, different shapes and sizes. Sometimes we mix box with yew. Here we've just used box altogether. Sometimes we put rosemary balls, holly balls, bay balls, and mix them all together, tucurin balls. There's all sorts of plants that you can topiarise to add interest. I like also doing serpentines or curves with box or yew, and here we've done a wavy curl and we've put balls in between. Birds and animals look wonderful in topiary. I've seen huge elephants, I've seen bears, and my mother has a bird. Sometimes we call it a peacock, sometimes we don't, depending on who's clipping it and how good they are. But they just add a bit of fun. I really like growing statement plants in pots. It sort of highlights and emphasises them. The problem with yew is it really hates growing in a pot for any length of time, 1 or 2 years, and it often starts to look a bit sick. So what we tend to do is cut the base out of the pot, put soil underneath the pot, set the sides of the pot on something firm, like a bit of concrete, so it doesn't move around, and then the plant can grow through the pot and down into the ground. That way you don't have to water it, the plant stays much healthier, it grows much bigger, and nobody can pinch it because plants in pots are very pinchable nowadays.